Serious, doctors/nurses of Reddit, who is the creepiest patient you have come across? 1. Nurse here. There was this one girl who was drunk and possibly on drugs taken to the ER. She hit her head hard and suffered loss of consciousness. She kept on freaking out and screaming. We had to restrain her legs because she kept on kicking at us. There were about 4 of us holding her down. Then, one nurse accidentally loosened his grip on her arm. She then proceeded to yanking out her foreline using her mouth. Started thrashing around again when we tried to restrain her. We couldn't cover up her wound because she was moving so much that blood was everywhere. I told her she should stay still, or we'll sedate her. She grabbed me using her bloodied hand and death stared right into my eyes before hitting me on the gut. Another time when I was at a psych ward, we were doing our daily exercise routine. I noticed one patient agitated and did not participate. I looked at the other nurses and the doctor and saw they were observing her as well, so I thought to just continue on the exercise. All of a sudden, we heard her screaming that someone wants to kill her and she's begging for her medication. One of the nurses rushed off to get her meds. She said the voice is going to kill her soon and she needed her meds now, but the nurse isn't back yet. So saw 3 pebbles, thought it was her meds, and drank it. Thankfully, the doctor performed the Heimlich maneuver and got the pebbles out. When she was in isolation, she kept calling us and saying the voices wouldn't hurt her for now, but they wanted to hurt the rest of us by giving her medication. Needless to say, she was in isolation for quite some time. 3. ER nurse. I had a patient once who was off his psych meds. Want more than a little crazy. But we had to make sure that he wasn't on something else. The doctor ordered a urine drug screen and the patient refused to provide samples. Of course, I drew the short straw and had to straight cath, temporary catheter that is removed immediately following acquisition of the sample, the guy. He really enjoyed the experience and thanked me afterward. I was thoroughly disgusted. His wife, when she got there, was very apologetic. Apparently, he goes off his meds about 2x a year and this happens. Also, had a seemingly random person just start beating off in an area where he was in full view of other people and just separated from other beds by a certain. He made eye contact. I told him to knock it off and he just grinned and kept going. Police were called. 4. Not my story, but my coworkers, we are phlebotomists. When she worked at a hospital, there was a guy who would come in occasionally for psych and long-term illness care/monitoring. Sometimes, he was fine. Sometimes, he would intentionally make you stick yourself, by flinching, jerking, or what have you, after you drew his blood. Apparently, everyone who worked on a floor where he was seen regularly had suffered a needle stick injury after drawing him once or twice. He was also HIV positive, so there were always a couple of weeks of suffering through the preventative medication treatment and waiting for your own blood test results afterwards. I was appalled when my coworker shared this with me, as I would absolutely refuse to draw a patient with a reputation like that. So, I guess that's not really creepy, but definitely scary. 5. Obligatory, not a doctor or nurse, but I was an ER registration clerk. I had one old guy in a wheelchair, keep telling me how I should be a heartbreaker bunny. Granted, he was stuck in the wheelchair, so there wasn't any threat implied. But knowing the weird old guy was imagining me with my clothes off was not a pleasant thought. 6. Had a patient who was a convicted child molester. Apparently, he was a prominent man in the field in which he worked before he went to jail and lost everything after being convicted of molesting his 2 adopted sons. I asked him if I could get him anything before leaving his room once, and he said an 8-year-old little boy. I told him that was inappropriate, and he will not speak to me like that. He was just an odd bird all around. He yanked his 4 out one night because he didn't like it, and then fell asleep. I came into a big puddle of blood on the floor and all over him. 7. New York City, 2007-ish. In the ED on a Saturday night, about 3-minute ambulance ride or 20-minute drunken stumble from Times Square. Another intoxication in the cost. Being the internal medicine resident in the ED, I got a lot of these. Sleep it off, maybe some 4 fluids. This particular gentleman was notable, mostly for his size, at least 6 feet 7 inches, and 280 pounds, completely bald, dressed very well. He reminded me of the judge from Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian. Heck, he was the judge, as far as I was concerned, taking a field trip from Cormac's apocalyptic Wild West to slum it on 59th Street. Anyway, he freaked out. It took 6 of us to subdue him enough to shoot him up with a horse dose of Haldol. After the deed was done, he lay there calmly, looked straight up at me, and in the most gentlemanly, Savannah nobility Southern accent you can imagine, said in a conspiratorial whisper, "I'm going to kill you, you know that, right?" Smiled and said sure. I've heard worse. Went about my business. He woke up in half an hour. Again, freaked out. This time it took 8 of us. The shears came out, his clothes were cut off as we got him into a hospital gown that looked like a mini skirt on someone his size. It was then that we found tucked into the back of his pants the foot-long serrated knife that made Paul Hogan's look like a Cub Scout's toothpick. He slept soundly for the rest of the night. I didn't. 8. I worked in a long-term care facility, and I floated to another unit, no big deal, but you get used to people's quirks. It's not uncommon to have creepy male/female patients, but it's your duty to provide unbiased care. One guy just gave me the jeebs. I couldn't figure out why, and I always tried to ignore the gossip, went in, and tried to give the guy the benefit of the doubt. I introduced myself and told him I am the nurse for the night, take his vitals, and give his meds. He had a serious wound that needed to be cleansed and treated and dressed. The whole time he is making the while you're down there type jokes and talking about sex in graphic detail. I don't respond and continue working. I don't want to rush, because his wound seemed as if some people had been neglecting it because of his behavior. Then he starts to jerk off, and he sprays all over the curtain that divides the room. At this time, I notice he has crusted semen on his window curtains, sheets, his gown, and on the floor under my feet. This was his typical behavior, and he basically stayed in his room 24/7, but then he started making the rounds in his wheelchair. All of a sudden during the late evening, when people were getting ready for bed, he would get in his wheelchair and wheel around. Limited night staff, so he went around unnoticed for a while, then he got caught red-handed. Come to find out he was stalking out for easy prey and was molesting some of the bedridden and dementia patients in the middle of the night. When I heard about this, I questioned why we weren't calling the police officers, and then I was told it wasn't my unit or my shift and to mind my own business. 9. I'm currently on a psychiatric placement, and it seems that every other patient I meet claims to have been possessed by the Holy Spirit. The creepiest one was a patient that said she would spiritually torture and kill a doctor by 4 a.m. And although I didn't believe a single word she said, I was still extra careful when traveling home. Luckily, everyone survived until the next day.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.